Hey there, quilting friend! It's Carolina Moore, your favorite sewing and quilting YouTuber, and we are working on our Mini Quilt Advent. Now, days 1 through 12, we made all the blocks for the Mini Quilt Advent. Yesterday, on the 13th, we put them all together to make the quilt top, and today we are going to go ahead and quilt that quilt top using a walking foot. Now, you can quilt it however you want. You can hand quilt it, you can do free motion quilting, you can send it to a long armor. There are lots and lots, and you can tie your quilt. There are lots and lots of ways to secure the top and the batting and the backing together. This is just one way, and I find this a super beginner friendly way as well. And even though I've been quilting for over 30 years, it's a way that I often go to quilt my own quilts because it's super fast and easy, and you can do it on just about any machine. You just need a walking foot, which is a piece of specialty equipment, but is available for just about every machine on the market. So we're going to dive right into it, get this quilt quilted, and then tomorrow we're going to bind it and have a finished quilt. So let's get started. Alright friends, if you're not already subscribed, you've been watching for a while, or maybe this is your first video, I don't know, but you should pop over to that subscribe button and hit subscribe so that you can join in, and we are going to get started right away, popping right into our project. Okay, so I have our mini quilt completely done here, and we are going to baste it. I am a spray baster. There are other ways to baste, but spray basting is, again, super simple and easy. This is one of my favorites. This is Spray and Bond by Thermoweb. It's available at a lot of different stores. Other great brands that I've used are the Dritz brand, which is like a green and yellow can. 505 spray is great, and Sulky has a spray that I like as well. So those are all brands that I've used, and you can feel totally comfortable using, and I'll link to all those down below if you want to check them out. And I have my top, and then I actually had a scrap piece of batting that was big enough, and then I have my backing fabric. This fabric is actually from the Art Gallery Fabrics line 2 years ago, Christmas in the City, and this was Christmas in the Country that we used this year. So they go together enough that I can use this. I also love using a past fabric as a backing fabric because you can often find it in the sale section of quilt shops. So especially for larger quilts, backing fabric, you tend to need a lot more of it, so it can add up pretty quickly. So going into the sale section and finding a fabric that's close enough that will work is my favorite for backing fabrics. Although, I mean, I also love a piece. I shouldn't say it's my favorite because I love a piece. There's so many ways. You can do pieced backings. You can also, there's 108 wide for big quilts. So there's lots of backing options, but that's definitely one. Okay, so it doesn't quite fit here in the frame, but I have my backing fabric. I had 2/3 of a yard, and then I cut it down from width of fabric so it isn't quite the whole width of fabric because we don't need that much. And then you want your backing fabric to be bigger than your batting, which needs to be bigger than your quilt top, and give it yourself like 1.5 to 2 inches of like graduated increase in size. And now we're going to spray baste this. Now again, you can thread baste, you can pin baste, those are both options as well, but spray basting is my favorite. So I'm going to start by, I use my fingers to kind of give myself a guide on this batting so that I know how big an area to spray on my batting and I don't have too much overspray. And then I spray. And then I just want to press it. I want to make sure that I'm not stretching the quilt top out at all. I'm really just smoothing it out and pressing it down. So smoothing it out from the center out and pressing it down. There we go. Now I'm going to flip this over. Again, give myself some kind of marking so that I don't overspray too much. I should start to feel it grab a little bit, and then spray. You want to do this in a well-ventilated area because it is an aerosol spray, and you don't want to breathe it in because it's, you know, it's not oxygen. It's not designed for your body. All right, now I'm just gonna do the same thing on the back as well. This time I can do the whole thing. Now I always prefer to spray on the batting rather than the fabric, because sometimes depending on how old your spray can is, sometimes you'll get like a weird squirt of adhesive spray, and that can sometimes stain your fabric, and that's never worth it to me. So I always just spray on my batting, and I've never had an issue. The point isn't to have it glued together, it's basted. It's temporarily just tacked together enough that it holds and doesn't shift while we are quilting it. But the point isn't, like, this is not the permanent hold. This is just temporary. So if a little bit of the tackiness is lost because I did it on the batting instead of on the fabric, that's not much loss, it's fine. All right, I have my layers together. Now I need to set up my walking foot on my sewing machine. So this is the walking foot for my baby lock. Depending on your sewing machine, you might need a different walking foot, even if you have a baby lock. There's different kinds of, like, there's high shank and low shank. Just know the model of your machine and either look it up online at your dealer's website or go to your local dealer and ask them, hey, what do I need for my baby lock Jubilant? And they'll make sure that you get the right walking foot. So what we need to do is we actually need to take off the entire foot assembly. So this is the kind of quick switch to be able to switch out a foot like that. But I need the whole foot assembly. So that is going to be done with a screwdriver. Okay, so I'm going to unscrew this screw, and that's going to be enough to take this off. And so I don't lose it, I'm going to go ahead and put it here in my little carry case, and then I'm going to attach the walking foot. Now the walking foot gets attached in two places, and that's sometimes where people can get hung up on how to attach a walking foot, is because it doesn't just get attached where that screw goes on, but there's also this arm right here that goes on what's called the needle bar. So there's two spots that you want to attach it, and that's both on the screw that we're going to tighten in a second and on the needle bar. Once you have it in both those spots, then you can tighten your screw. Now you want to decide what color thread you want on the top and in the bobbin, and change those out if the threads that you have here are not the threads that you want in your top and bobbin. Now I have a white thread on the top and a cream in the bobbin, and I think that'll be fine for what we're doing here. Also, you can determine your stitch length. So I like a little bit longer stitch length for top stitching, and on this mini quilt it's going to really look like top stitching, so I'm going to go ahead and bump my stitch length up to a 3.5, and I think that's going to give it a nicer look, but you can use whatever stitch length you want for your project. Now when we quilt, we generally want to quilt from the center out, even though we've basted, and the reason we do that is because if you start from one side, you can tend to have ruffling, and then it gets worse and worse and worse as you go out. So if you start in the middle and work your way out, first of all, it's tougher to get that kind of ruffling, and if you do, it would only be from the middle out instead of getting worse across the whole thing. So any ruffling would be half as bad, although honestly you don't get it nearly as bad just because you are working that fabric out rather than trying to work that fabric across. So how close you quilt the lines on your quilt actually has to do with your batting. And I grabbed a piece of scrap batting, so I don't have the package to refer to. If you have the package, that's ideal, and the package will tell you on the package how close your quilting has to be to one another. So for example, your quilting might need to be 8 inches or less apart, or 6 inches or less apart, or 12 inches or less apart, and that lets you know, okay, this is how much open space I can have between quilting stitches and still have my quilt keep its integrity. Now, if this is going to be a wall hanging and it's only ever going to be a wall hanging and it's not going to get a lot of use, then you don't really have to worry as much about those rules, but it's good to know, okay, this is what I need to do. Now, these are 6" by 4" finished blocks with 1" sashing. So if you were to quilt right in the middle of the sashing on each one, you'd have 7 inches in the widest and 5 inches in the narrowest, because these are rectangular blocks. So as long as your batting has 8 inches or less, you're totally fine there. If your batting says 6 inches or less, then that wouldn't be enough. Now, I want to kind of accentuate my sashing, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to stitch just inside, or just outside the sashing, inside the block, around the quilt, and I think that's going to look cute. You could do it the other way around and go just inside the sashing, and that could also look cute, but I'm going to go just inside the block, and we'll see how it turns out. If I hate it, I could always unpick it, or I could add more quilting, or I could give the quilts away, because when you really hate a quilt, you just give it away, and the person who gets it, they love it, right? That's the way that works. So we're going to start in the middle of the quilt, and I said I want to go just inside, so I'm going to quilt here, and then here, and then here, and then here, and then I'll flip it over and go here, 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 and then I'll turn the quilt and go the other way. Now, when we have a quilt that is bigger than our sewing machine, and this won't all fit under the bed of this sewing machine. This is a smaller machine, and it starts bunching up. The way that we handle that is by just rolling up the edge of the quilt. So you roll this up and bring it over to the machine. And it won't be a problem. Now, I do need to start my stitching all the way here, so you can do like we did with our sashing pieces and draw lines to be able to get everything lined up. I like to eyeball things. I think it's going to be fine. So I'm just going to eyeball that roughly straight line right there. And I'm lining up the edge of my sashing piece with one of the openings here on my walking foot. Now, walking foot is super cool because it basically has feed dogs on the top, which work in conjunction with the feed dogs on the bottom. And so having feed dogs on the top and the bottom means that both the top and bottom of the quilt will feed through evenly, and I'm less likely to have any ripples or puckers in the quilting of my quilt. So I go all the way across, trim my threads. And some people like to flip their entire quilt top, so they're going one direction one time and then the other direction the other time. This is such a small top that I don't think that's going to be a big deal. So I'm just going to bring it back over. And stitch using that same reference opening but on the other side of the walking foot, and stitching. Now you can go as slow or as fast as you want. Fast obviously means it gets done faster, but slow means that you're a little more accurate in your stitching, so it's totally up to you in how accurate or precise or how much time you want to spend in quilting your quilt. Alright, I'm going to keep going, stitching on either side, all the way along. And we'll come back when we're ready to do the other side. All right, I've done all my horizontal lines, and now I can do my vertical lines to get this all quilted. And again, I wanted to start from the middle out. There isn't a middle here, so I'm going to start here, and then here, and then here, and then same on the other side. Okay, I have the whole quilt quilted here, and I like the way this looks. Now let's talk a little bit about other quilting designs and other quilting options. So I decided to do about, will end up being about a 1/4 inch away on inside the quilt blocks on everything, because I hadn't taken the time on all of my sashing pieces to line them up. So if I take a ruler here, you can see this sashing piece doesn't line up by, about somewhere between a 1/16 and an 1/8 of an inch. And I chose not to go back and fix that, but it's not as obvious with this kind of stitching versus if the stitching was inside, it would really be more obvious that it veers. Whereas it's in these busy piecing areas, so it's not quite so obvious that it shifts a little bit as it goes through the quilt. If you have a lot of things that don't line up, their free motion quilting, like doing swirls or loops, is a great way to hide some of that. Some people like to do like cross hatching across the quilt. It's a little different to do cross hatching with a rectangular quilt, because your cross hatching, it's tougher to do. You've got square, like not cornerstones, but spots where cornerstones would be, and then rectangular blocks, so everything doesn't line up exactly on your cross hatching, which also could help disguise things, but it wouldn't be like I'm going from this point on this block to this point to then this point to then this point. You would end up with a weird stair-steppy thing if you tried to do that. But you could do like an across, and then do kind of like X's through the whole thing. That would be an option. Really, the sky's the limit when it comes to different ways that you can quilt your quilt. I chose the most simple, the most basic, the most straightforward, just to have her quilted and done, because it's December, and if I want this done in December to be able to actually use it, simple is the way to go. I mean, they were simple blocks. It's simply quilted. All right, we're going to square this up real quick so that it's ready for tomorrow's binding. And then tomorrow we're going to do the whole thing binding by machine. So don't be shocked. I'm going to show you how to bind the whole thing by machine. If you want to finish your binding by hand, you totally can. That's totally allowed. I just want to show the fastest, easiest, quickest way to get her done. And I have other videos that show you how to hand bind and do other things as well. So but we'll talk about that tomorrow. All right, I'm going to go get my big ruler and we're going to square this up. My best tip for squaring up is to get the biggest ruler that you have, which for me is this massive giant thing. This is a 20.5 by 20.5 inch ruler, so it is massive. It's almost big enough to just square up this whole quilt as a quilt, but not quite. So when squaring up your quilt, you want to find different reference points on your quilt. So I know that this sashing started out at 1.5 inches. Which means it's now at 1.25 inches. And I want to feel to where the end of my mat goes here, so this fits on my mat as much as I can. So find those reference spots, try to line everything up as best you can before we go cutting into the quilt. And then trim up along 2 sides of 1 corner. And then you can use your rotary cutter or scissors. Cut off this extra bit that's here, because this will be in your way when you go to square up other parts of your quilt. All right, so now we're going to turn it 90 degrees. If you have a longer quilt, you would line up and keep going on your longer edges. We're going to do the same thing. Find reference points, try to line things up against this edge that you've already created. And then keep going around all 4 corners of your quilt. All right, this is looking very much like a finished quilt. It almost is. We are getting there. It just needs the binding, which we're going to do tomorrow. I'm going to be using the AGF 2.5 edition binding that goes with this fabric kit, but if you're using your own binding, that's totally fine. A lot of tomorrow's video will still be relevant for you as well. So I can't wait to show that to you. And then tomorrow we're going to have a completely finished, fully finished project that we made in December. Y'all, that's wild. Alright friends, thanks so much for watching. Make sure you give this video a thumbs up. Subscribe if you haven't already. Leave your comments down below. I do look for those. And if you have any questions, I definitely want to get those answered for you. That's it for today, my friends. I'll see you right here real soon. Bye for now.